we're getting it all wrong, and it's actually pretty costly. The system is old, the border is broken. This system just is failing on all fronts.
Talking about economic impact of immigration, Jorge Lima, Senior Vice President of Policy for Americans for Prosperity, americansforprosperity.org. When someone says to you, what do we need? What do you tell them?
I say that immigration is good for the country, but we do need a functioning system, one that it can be respected and actually meets the needs of the country.
So let's talk about what it is we have right now that isn't meeting the needs of the country. What, if you were going to laundry list it, one thing, two things, three things, your top three things that we do in the United States that simply don't work. We've proven that it doesn't work. What are those things?
So one, the system itself doesn't actually keep up with the times, right? It's an archaic system at the moment that was already decades old. So it doesn't meet the economic demands, the community needs of the country right now. So I think that's one of the reasons we're getting it wrong. The second big thing we're getting wrong is we don't actually have enforcement at the border, right? Right now, because the system is so wrong, it seems that the border is the only way to get in. And we have not kept up with the needs of our enforcement officers at the border or the processing officers at the border, just to understand what is actually happening and make sure that we can, again, keep America safe and keep the interests of America top of mind. And then third, I would say that the government bureaucracy has been horrible in terms of actually processing whatever remnants of a system we currently have.
What is the economic impact of the policies that we have now? And what is your vision, AFP's vision, a vision, if you will, of policies, and how does that help that economic impact?
We're getting it all wrong, and it's actually pretty costly. So we are not enforcing the law as we currently have it, or doing it in a way that seems aligned with what we have in terms of our system. And so when we do that, we have to understand that then we see more people start to come because they understand that our system is actually incentivizing them to do that, right? Like that is the way you get into the country now. Much easier than trying to get through one of the visa systems, trying to navigate any sort of process that we currently have. And those costs are significant. We're seeing those costs at the border directly, right? So the time that the CBP folks at the border are focusing more on humanitarian efforts versus security efforts, like there's a cost to that. And it's our security costs, right? So we're not getting the kind of security that the country expects and demands. And then we're seeing the cost as we try to come up ad hoc with systems that are going to bring in the people who are at the border or deport them, right? So there's also a cost to that. And we're just not doing it effectively or efficiently.
We know that we've got millions of people trying to get in front of a judge. And we have heard that the backlog there to actually seeing a judge is upwards of 5 years. So certainly as a policy that doesn't work, but doesn't this go to the idea, and we hear this a lot, that part of our policy issue is that we are engaged in this constant conversation about asylum?
Shouldn't be anyone surprised that the asylum system is being overwhelmed. And you are absolutely correct. There are people who are trying to come in through the asylum process who won't qualify and should not be thinking that asylum is the way in. But at the moment, we are not actually having a functioning system that allows individuals who are coming for economic reasons, which, by the way, the country wants them. We have a huge gap in terms of demands from our business sector and economic sectors of labor demands that are not being met. And so as a country, we want more people to come and apply their skills and apply their talents here. But we're telling them that the only way to actually come in and do that is through the asylum, to then work without the right work authorization and kind of live in the shadows. And that there's a cost to each of that process, not just to the country, but to the immigrants themselves. And so anyone who's advocating for this status quo is neither a friend to the immigrant or the country, because this system just is failing on all fronts.
If everybody is pushing for asylum, this is a massive drain on the economy. Do we have a number, though? We talk about it costs money, that this policy is costing us economically. Do we have a number to what what this policy is costing us?
I mean, there are a number of estimates out there, but I would say, and some folks are putting it in the hundreds of millions, into the billions even, when you start looking at all of the consequences of this kind of failed system, from the enforcement side, the security side, and then of course just the labor market and economic side. But all of that tiers up to a cost to the country when we know that immigration is a net benefit, right? Immigration helps, the immigrant helps the country, and over time, it's something that really continues to position the United States as the economic powerhouse that it is. And yet we're almost like tripping over ourselves to get there when we can do it in a much better way. You bring up asylum. Right now, the conversation is all about asylum because it's getting overwhelmed. What I would hope from our leaders is that the solution conversation shifts away from asylum, because if all we're talking about is a debate about whether to shut down or expand asylum, you're missing the point. The big problem is our legal immigration system, and that's the one that needs to get fixed, needs to be expanded, and when it don't qualify, needs to be enforced. That is how you are fair to the immigrant. That is how you help build trust and confidence in the American people, that you have an immigration system that takes their best interest at heart and is really here to help the country.
What Americans are saying is, what about the fairness to us? What about the fairness to my kids? What about the fairness to the amount we're spending at the border, as opposed to where we should be spending this money in other places? You often hear this conversation regarding veterans. Look at all that's given to people coming across the border illegally, and look at veterans sleeping in their cars. So the fairness conversation to the migrant is one that seems offensive at the quick, as opposed to how do we ensure immigration that keeps Americans safe, that keeps Americans prosperous, and recognizes the value on the other side.
I think you're absolutely right, and I'm glad you brought this up, Tony, because you are seeing that the fairness argument has almost been weaponized. And the whole point of the fairness argument is only to point fingers and to show somebody that they're losing at the cost of somebody else. We reject that. And so when I talk about fairness, what I'm talking about is quite simply equal treatment under the law, that the law is clear and that people understand how the law will apply to them, and that we are applying that law equally. And so what are our visas, and do you qualify? And if you do not qualify, then you should know. And if you are still here after you don't qualify, you should be deported. We don't have clarity of the law that allows people to understand what process they can undertake, how can they come in. Instead, to your point earlier, we say, okay, you somehow made it across the border in 5 years, please come back and see a judge, at which point maybe we'll give you a point of view on whether or not we think you should stay. And I'm oversimplifying here, but that is not fair, right? The idea that nobody knows, the immigrant doesn't know, the American people don't know what the laws actually say and whether or not they're even being enforced.
Tell me, here at Americans for Prosperity, I'm talking to Jorge Lima, Senior Vice President of Americans for Prosperity for Policy. Here's what we're proposing. This is what we'd like to see Republicans and, yes, Democrats to get behind. Walk me through it.
Well, we think, first of all, you got to look at the legal system. And I start there because that is a way that you're going to relieve some of the pressure that's currently at the border. So I'm not just trying to put legal systems on top of border. I think they're both uniquely destined together. And so you've got to look at our system, and we would start by saying the current system just doesn't keep up with demands. And so how do we make sure that immigrants have a way to access a visa if they want to come work, if work is available here in the United States? And we can talk about how you make those visas go through the process to understand what the actual demand is, and that there are abilities for the employers to understand and vet the individual, as well as our security systems to vet the individual before they come in. But we are ill prepared to actually provide the type of temporary visas or seasonal visas or even longer term work visas that our economy demands. Those things need to be relooked. Now, we have to look at them in a way that, again, not only understands our demands as a country and as an economy, but also understands the processing side. Because what happens, we can design it to meet those demands, and suddenly the bureaucracy takes over, and then again, we're stuck with huge backlogs. We're stuck with huge bureaucratic requirements that just make it almost impossible to bring folks. And then guess what? You're stuck again in a system that incentivizes folks to go outside of the system.
So when you talk about demand, the word demand hit me as an off kind of word, but then you came back to it. The idea that there's demand to get into the country is different than what our country needs as a nation. The policy is based on our needs, correct?
Yeah, I talk about economic demands, or I'm referencing economic demands. So what am I looking at? I'm looking at the fact that we have 7 million open jobs in the economy. and that number is stagnated. It's not really moving in terms of getting smaller. So we have got opportunities for labor to come and contribute. And again, that's not charity. That doesn't mean that it's just a job for an immigrant. That means a more successful operation or company in the United States. That means greater gains and creation and innovation for the American consumer. And so those are demand signals that our economy are sending. And that's just knowing right now what we know about the labor market. We know that America also demands innovation. We demand to be, if there's going to be a building of Fortune 500 companies, we want it to be here. The American people say that. They want those types of companies to be created here. And more often than not, the entrepreneurship rates of immigrations are very high. We know that Fortune 500 companies, at least half of them were created by immigrants or children of immigrants. So that's the type of grit and contribution that the country is demanding. It's not just one-sided in terms of looking at the immigrant demand to come in. It really is the country need, as you say, or the economic demand that the country is putting out as a signal that needs to be taken into account in our system.
Jorge Lima, Senior Vice President of Policy for Americans for Prosperity, AmericansForProsperity.org. Thank you.